What has mythology told you about death? What do you think about death?
Well, the way, if one can identify with the consciousness of which the body is a vehicle, and really achieve an identification with the consciousness of which the body is a vehicle, not knowing what it is, undifferentiated consciousness, one can let the body go. I like what I heard of Woody Allen, you know, I'm not afraid to die, I just don't want to be there when it happens. You can have disengaged yourself from the body and not be there, you might say. And yet, you know from myth and nature that the body dies. It perishes, it rots. We're back to the beginning of the mother. So you expect it. Growing old, I mean, you know what's happening. The body is rotting. It's dying. It's losing its energy. There's more mass than energy here. And the identification then with the life which in a plant survives pruning, cutting, and even eating. The plant is right back there again. Is you might say, a biological image that is metaphorical of this spiritual mystery. There's that wonderful report of the Indians riding into the rain of bullets from Custer's men, and they're saying, it's a good day to die. It's a great day to die. They're not hanging on. That's the message of the myth. You, as you know yourself, are not the final term of your being. And you must die to that one way or another, in giving of yourself to something or in being annihilated, actually, physically, to return, you might say, or to recognize. Life is always on the edge of death, always. And one should lack fear and have the courage of life. That's the principal initiation of all of the heroic stories. What's the central story? Do you have a story that's central to this? The Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The Green Knight, Arthur's court is in session, and there rides into the court on a great big green horse, a giant knight. And the knight says, I have a challenge. I have an adventure. I challenge anyone here to come down here and take this great big axe and cut my head off, and then 1 year from today, meet me at a green chapel, and he tells them roughly where the green chapel is, and I'll cut his head off. And the only knight who had the courage to accept this curious invitation was Gawain. And the knight gets off his horse, sticks out his neck, Gawain comes down with his axe, and there's the head. And then the knight stands up, picks up the head, gets on the horse, and rides off, says, I'll see you in a year. Well, that year, everybody was very generous to Gawain, and he rides off for the year. As the day approaches, he finds himself before a little hunter's cabin, and he thinks he'll ask advice here as to where the Green Chapel is, and tells him, I've got to be there in 3 days. And the hunter greets him, and Gawain tells his story, and the hunter says, well, it's the Green Chapel. He's just down the way here. It's about a couple of 100 yards. And why don't you just spend the next 3 days with us, and we'll entertain you, and then you can go to this adventure. All right, very well. So the hunter says, well, I've got to go out for the day on the hunt. And he says, you'll spend the night with us, and then in the morning I'll go forth, and in the evening I'll come back, and I'll give everything I will have got during the day to you, and you give to me what you will have got during the day. But in the morning, the hunter rides off, and Gawain's in bed, and in comes the hunter's gorgeous, beautiful wife. And she tickles Gawain's chin and invites him to love. Well, he's an Arthurian knight, a knight of Arthur's court, and to betray his host is the last thing that a knight can submit to, so he resists this woman. And she's very, very aggressive, and he's very, very stern in his position. And finally she says, well, let me give you a kiss anyhow. So she gives him one big smack, and that's that. In the evening, the hunter comes back with a great haul of game, throws it on the floor, and Gawain gives him a kiss And they laugh, and that's that. Second morning, a similar event. The wife comes in, and Gawain gets 2 kisses. And the hunter comes back with about half as much gain, and he gets 2 kisses. They laugh, and that's that. The third morning, the wife comes in. Now, here's a man about to meet his death. He's about to have his head chopped off. Beautiful woman, the last moment, I mean, of the possibility of this wonderful fulfillment. And again, he resists. She gives him 3 kisses and her garter. And she says, "This will protect you against any danger." The hunter comes home with just one silly, smelly fox, throws on the ground, and he gets 3 kisses, but no garter. So comes the time now to go and have your head chopped off. Do you see what the tests are of the night here? One is sex, you know, lust, and the other is courage. So he approaches the chapel, the green chapel, with the green knight whom he's about to encounter, and he hears the knight whetting this great knife, this great axe. He comes to it, and the knight is there, certainly, the great big green fellow, and he greets him and said, "Okay, put your neck out there on this block, and I'll chop your head off." And he lifts the axe, and he says, "No, stretch out a little more." He does this 3 times. And then the axe comes down and just cuts his neck a little bit. The Green Knight says, "That's for the garter." Well, this is the origin legend of the Knights of the Garter. Here's a knight who really transcended the 2 great temptations, fear of death and lust for sex and the joys of life.
And the moral?
And the moral is that the realization of your bliss, your true being, comes when you have put aside the what might be called passing moment with its terror and with its temptations and its statement of requirements of life, that you should live this way.
What is that story about, and I forget where it comes from, about the camel and then the lion, and along the way you lose the burden of youth?
The 3 transformations of the spirit.
Yeah.
That's Nietzsche. That's the prologue to Thus Spake Zarathustra.
Tell me that story.
When you are a child, when you are young and a young person, you are a camel. The camel gets down on its knees and says, "Put a load on me." This is obedience. This is receiving the instruction and information that your society knows you must have in order to live a competent life. When the camel is well loaded, he gets up on his feet, struggles to his feet, and runs out into the desert, where he becomes transformed into a lion. The heavier the load, the more powerful the lion. The function of the lion is to kill a dragon. And the name of the dragon is "Thou shalt." And on every scale of the dragon, there is a "Thou shalt" imprinted. Some of it comes from 2,000 years, 4,000 years ago. Some of it comes from yesterday morning's newspaper headline. When the dragon is killed, the lion is transformed into a child, an innocent child living out of its own dynamic. And Nietzsche uses the term ein aus sich rollendes Rad, a wheel rolling out of its own center. That's what you become. That is the mature individual. The "thou shalt" is a civilizing force. It turns a human animal into a civilized human being. But then the one who is thrown off the "thou shalt" is still a civilized human being. You see, he has been humanized, you might say, by the "thou shalt" system. So his performance now as a child is not simply childlike at all. He has assimilated the culture and thrown it off as a "thou shalt." But this is the way in any artwork. You go to work and study an art. You study the techniques. You study all the rules. And the rules are put upon you by a teacher. Then there comes a time of using the rules, not being used by them Do you understand what I'm saying?
You're
So
also,
one way is to follow, I always tell my students, follow your bliss.
follow your bliss?
Your bliss, where the deep sense of being in form and going where your body and the soul want to go. When you have that feeling, then stay with it and don't let anyone throw you off. Have you ever read Sinclair Lewis's Babbitt?
Not in a long time.
Do you remember the last line? I've never done the thing I wanted to in all my life.
Quite a
That's
limit.
the man who never followed his bliss. Well, I heard that line. I was living in Bronxville when I was teaching at Sarah Lawrence. Before I was married, I used to be eating out in the restaurants of the town for my lunch and dinners. And Thursday night was the maid's night off in Bronxville, so that all the families were out in the restaurants. And one fine evening, I was in my favorite restaurant there. It was a Greek restaurant. And at a table was sitting a father, a mother, and a scrawny little boy, about 12 years old. The father says to the boy, drink your tomato juice. And the boy says, I don't want to. And the father, with a louder voice, says, drink your tomato juice. And the mother says, don't make him do what he doesn't want to do. The father looks at her and she says, he can't go through life doing what he wants to do. Said, if he does only what he wants to do, he'll be dead. Look at me. I've never done the thing I wanted to in all my life. I said, my God, Babbitt incarnate. And that's the man who never followed his bliss. Well, you may have a success in life, but then just think of it. What kind of life was it? What good is it? You've never done the thing you wanted to in all your life.